tell me what game I'm describing. You play as a silent protagonist, on a mission preordained by a higher power. It's not Half-Life. You are accompanied by a tiny and occasionally annoying fairy that gives you tips and spouts constant exposition. Throughout the game, you collect items and money, typically from pots, you venture into various dungeons, and typically you fight a boss at the end of them using an arsenal consisting of swords and bombs. Oh, and you level up your health bar by collecting shards. If you said The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, you could not be more wrong. Don't worry though, I'll give you an extra hint. The main character is a wolf. No, it's not Zelda. Why am I doing this? The name of the game is literally in the title of this video. In all seriousness, I made that joke about Zelda because Okami is literally the best Zelda game you never played. Not only that, it's the actual greatest game you never played, period. That's not my opinion. That's the Guinness Book of World Records opinion. In 2009, the game literally won the title for greatest game that sold the least number of copies, selling over 600,000 copies over 3 years. Low-key that award should go to Panzer Dragoon Saga, but I digress. But that's what happens when you release a game with a wolf as your protagonist in the same year that Twilight Princess comes out. Thankfully though, Okami probably no longer holds that title because the game was constantly re-released on subsequent platforms, and eventually sold roughly 4 million copies, which was enough for a sequel to be greenlit. See, this is what happens when you make a game that is so damned good and you keep making it available. Whether it's Psychonauts, Nier, or Sleeping Dogs, people will eventually support it if they can access it easily. But why is Okami so good? Well, as I said, it is accurate to say that it's because the game embodies all of the elements of a great Legend of Zelda game. This is not a coincidence, by the way. The game's director, the legendary Hideki Kamiya, has openly stated, quote, that it's no overstatement to say that he created Okami because of Zelda. Despite this, it's also true that making this comparison can obscure the various things that set Okami apart from not just Zelda, but any game. Things like the Japanese watercolor art style, the gameplay mechanics, and its sense of humor. While I will give proper attention and credit to those and other original things in this video, I nonetheless find that comparing Okami to Zelda allows some of the game's deeper, more flavorful elements to reveal themselves. See, I wanted to play Okami for a while because lately, I've been studying various Asian spiritual and philosophical traditions to see how they have influenced the greatest Japanese games ever made. In doing that, I've reliably been able to uncover various potential secrets and hidden meanings that nobody else has discovered. In respect to Zelda, I've done some well-received videos explaining how Buddhism influenced Majora's Mask and how Taoism influenced Twilight Princess. I figured that by doing the same with Okami, a game whose entire DNA is clearly inspired by Japanese traditions, I could accomplish the same feat. Not only did I find both game franchises doing similar things, I might have found undiscovered parallels between Okami's protagonist and Link. Before I get into all of that though, I will kindly ask that if you have enjoyed my videos in the past and want to help ensure their continued production, please consider supporting me on Patreon or joining my YouTube membership section, where you can benefit from various perks and prizes. I will leave links to these in the description box below. Finally, I'm happy to say that this video contains no story spoilers, save for a description of one of the boss fights, which I will provide a timecode for so you can skip if you so desire. Now, let's get started with a brief, spoiler-free synopsis for those who have never played Okami. The game takes place in the land of Nippon, which is the formal native name for the country of Japan. At the beginning of the game, a narrator tells a 100-year-old tale of a white wolf named Shiranui, and a swordsman named Nagi fighting and defeating an 8-headed dragon named Orochi. They do this because the dragon had been terrorizing the village of Kamiki, demanding a female sacrifice every year at the village's annual festival. For Nagi, the final straw was drawn when Orochi demanded that the next sacrifice be the woman he longed for his entire life, a villager named Nami. Through his and the wolf's efforts, Nami is saved and Orochi is sealed away in a cave. Unfortunately, Shiranui did not survive the encounter, but the villagers honored the wolf's heroic deed by erecting a shrine and a statue of it in their village. After 100 years of peace and prosperity, an unknown agent removes the seal on the cave, causing Orochi to return and poison the land of Nippon. In response to this tragedy, the spirit guardian of Kamiki, Sakuya, calls upon the ancient goddess of the sun, Amaterasu, to reincarnate in the body of Shiranui. Through the combined efforts of both her and a little companion known as Isun, the land of Nippon will be restored to its original healthy state. From this point, the game follows the path of a typical Zelda game, as I already said. You primarily go through dungeons, solve puzzles, fight bosses and lower-level NPCs, all while gaining currency, items, new weapons, and upgrades to your stats. There are a couple of small differences though. Typically, in Zelda games, upgrades to core skills or more powerful weapons are obtained by completing side quests, which usually require a greater degree of skill and focus. In Okami, these types of side quests exist, but they don't tend to pose much of a challenge, and the rewards you obtain don't typically provide you a significant advantage in future conflicts. Generally speaking, you can get the most pivotal upgrades simply by collecting enough of what is called praise, a secondary currency that you can spend on upgrades to your health bar, your coin purse, and several other traits. You get praise by performing very simple acts of kindness that take, at most, maybe 5 seconds to complete. I'll get to the exact mechanics of that in a moment, but the thing I wish to highlight here is that the best rewards in Okami are obtained without much strife. In fact, if I'm being honest, the game doesn't present much of a challenge whatsoever. In the 35 hours I spent with the game, I think I only used 4 or 5 health items, and the stat boosts I got through praise were barely needed. Most of the puzzles are very simple too. Aside from a handful, the majority of them lacked that cerebral element that Zelda's puzzles have. They don't have that aha moment when you finally figure out what to do. You kinda just know right away what needs to be done. Granted, the combat does encourage you to try and get more money by finishing battles faster, which can be challenging, but even if you finish a battle slowly, the rewards you get are still sufficient, and the combat, while it feels good to play, is really easy to master. Now I understand that people who never played Okami might hear that and start to question why the game is so beloved if it's that easy. As somebody who has played it, I can confidently say that the whole point of Okami is not necessarily to challenge the gamer, but to give them a feeling of zen. And that is facilitated best through the game's most original element, the Celestial Brush. Of all the most refined and endearing game mechanics that exist, the Celestial Brush in Okami sits right alongside the likes of the Portal Gun from Portal or the Pokeball from Pokémon. In order to restore the land of Nippon, the gamer can temporarily pause the game and draw upon the screen with the Celestial Brush, becoming an active participant in the game's living canvas. The ink from the brush serves multiple purposes. For instance, in battle, you can draw a straight line in order to create a slash attack, or a circle and line to create a bomb. Depending on the type of enemy you're facing, you might need to use specifically one brush attack or a mixture in order to defeat the enemy as efficiently as you can. The brush is also used to solve puzzles. Sometimes you might need to slow down a contraption in order to maneuver around it, which you do by drawing 2 straight lines. Or maybe you need to move a companion faster. To do this, you draw a loop-de-loop in order to birth a gust of wind, which then pushes your companion forward. The only thing better than the genius of this mechanic is how well it works. You might suspect that something like this could be pretty finicky, resulting in many drawings that do nothing, which does happen on occasion. But 90+% of the time, it's not a problem at all, due to the simplicity of the drawings required to complete an action. Even when you don't draw the best circle or line, the game almost always knows what you're going for. But in respect to creating a feeling of zen, this is accomplished primarily by drawing circles on dead trees and patches of barren land. Doing this causes life to burst forward like water from a collapsing dam, be it in the form of grass and animal life, or leaves on trees. Though you are incentivized to do this in order to get the praise currency, I found that this wasn't my primary motivator for most of the game, especially when I found that spending praise on upgrades made the game easier than it already was. Instead, it was to bask in the game's celebration of life, and the sublimity of nature at its apex. Knowing that I rid an area completely of impurity gave me a surprisingly powerful feeling of tranquility. Running around in the area after it had been cleansed was a greater reward than a new weapon or a stat boost. It's not only a testament to how strong Okami's art direction is, but it's also a strong tribute to the spiritual and philosophical traditions of Japan. Though both Japan in the game and real-life Japan benefit from a variety of these traditions, the primary influence is obviously Shintoism, and Shinto's primary goal, its primary ethic, is to achieve harmony with nature. Interestingly, this is not primarily done by prioritizing the concept of good over evil, but rather by prioritizing purity, or hare, over impurity, or kegare. This is why, traditionally, when you visit Shinto shrines, you need to wash your hands and mouth using a purification fountain known as a temizuya. Doing purification rituals like this supposedly allows one's inner spirit, or kami, to align with the kami in the world that surrounds, be it the kami of a deity, or the kami that inhabits every aspect of nature, from the tallest mountain to the lowest rock. Purity and allowing life to flourish is the way of the gods in Shinto. In fact, that is what the word Shinto means. Shin originates from the Chinese character Shen, which means God, and To originates from the Chinese character Dao, which means way. And yes, this character Dao is the same one used for Taoism, which, like several other Asian traditions in both Okami and real-life Japan, syncretize wonderfully with their native Shinto. To be in harmony with nature in Shinto and Taoism is to be in harmony with the primordial force of creation. In Taoism, that force is Qi, and in Shintoism, that force is Musubi, and the kami are the extension of that force. By doing one's best to allow nature to proliferate, to prevent any outside impurities or negative intentions from corrupting the kami and musubi, is the way of the gods. And the beauty of that ethic is captured magnificently in both the art style and gameplay of Okami. But this is not the full extent of Okami's symbolism when it comes to purity and personal exaltation. The game is awash with religious imagery and concepts that showcase the power latent in Asian spiritualism and philosophy, stemming not just from Shinto and Taoism, but also Buddhism. Not only will I present the various ways these philosophies show up in the game, I will also attempt to do what I did when analyzing the Zelda games, which is reveal some potentially hidden meanings that nobody has noticed before. First, let's keep the focus on Shinto and how Okami makes use of the religion's primary figures. If I'm being honest, Okami is about as accurate with Japanese myths as God of War is with Greek and Norse myths. But in both respects, there are a few consistent elements that help maintain the spirit of the original characters and stories. Take the aforementioned character of Nagi, who slays the dragon Orochi to save Nami. In the original Shinto creation myth, it was Nagi's son, Susanoo, god of storms and the ocean, who slayed Orochi in order to save a woman named Kushinada Hime. Nagi and Nami, or rather Izanagi and Izanami, their official names, have a much different story than the one portrayed in the game. They are, in effect, the creator gods of Japan. From a Chinese perspective, they represent the Taoist forces of yin and yang, which serve as the foundation of every aspect of life. Nonetheless, the story that is told does borrow some canonical elements while changing others in order to more effectively portray and pay tribute to Japanese culture and ethics. Returning to the whole concept of purity, there's one key example of that in Okami that keeps some things canonical from Japanese myth while changing other things. Unfortunately, this is the boss fight that I said at the beginning of the video contains a story spoiler. If you don't want to hear this example, skip ahead to this time code on screen. You have been warned. So, Just as Nagi slayed Orochi in the Okami creation story, his descendant, Susanoo, named after Susanoo, must slay Orochi with Amaterasu when Orochi reawakens. The method used to defeat Orochi is actually the same as it is in the Japanese myth. 8 vats of sake are used to inebriate Orochi's 8 heads so they can all be chopped off. What is different, however, are 2 things. First is the sake being used specifically to purify the heads of Orochi rather than just put it to sleep, hence the name 8 Purification Sake. Second is the association of 8 different elements with the heads of Orochi: earth, wind, fire, water, light, dark, lightning, and poison. So why the elements? And why the need to purify them when the original story said nothing of the sort? It's a strong possibility that they were just added to make the boss battle more dynamic, but indulge me as I present another interpretation. Dragons are one of the most common mythological symbols for the concept of chaos. Chaos being an adjective for disunity, but also being the formless chaos from which the world was made. This goes all the way back to the Mesopotamian creation myth, where Marduk forms the world out of the body of the dragon Tiamat. Now within that world-creating substance are the building blocks of all life, which various cross-cultural mythologies interpret as the elements. Depending on the culture, there could be 4 elements or more. In the Taoist and Shinto systems, for instance, there are 5 elements, a fact that is referenced by the characters known as the Tao Troopers, Abe and Kamo, in Okami. These 2 are based on historical Japanese divinators and shamans known as Abe no Seimei and Kamo no Yasunori. Note the upside-down pentagram on their headpieces. This either represents the Japanese elemental system, or more likely, the Chinese Wujing elemental system. Turning back to Orochi, being a chaos dragon that embodies the elements is appropriate, because it is by embodying chaos and the elements contained within that he can manipulate the elements when they are in their ordered state. In other words, he is bringing the world and its elements from a state of yang, or ordered purity, into a state of yin, or disordered chaos. Though Susanoo isn't making the universe out of Orochi, he is purifying the corrupted source so that all life may be pure once again. I must also note that the unification, or in this case reunification, of elemental forces is a very common mythological symbol for transcendence. The idea is that by uniting the first elements to emerge into the universe from the divine source, from God if you will, that the divine source can be recreated. In video games, the uniting of elements doesn't typically result in God, but it does tend to result in the protagonist obtaining the most powerful weapon or tool in the game. One example that is relevant comes from The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. You get the most powerful weapon in that game, the Four Sword, by uniting the powers of the 4 classical elements within that sword. There's a few other examples of this that I will cite in a moment, but to set those up, I will quickly return to Okami. One thing that is consistent in both the original Shinto myth of Susanoo and Orochi and the one in Okami comes when you fight Orochi the second time. Upon defeating Orochi, you obtain the most powerful weapon in the game known as the Thunder Edge. The Japanese name for this weapon is Ama no Murakumo no Tsurugi, which is the name given to one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan. The other 2 being the Mirror and the Magatama, which are the other 2 sets of weapons that you can use in Okami, though Magatama are called rosaries. In respect to the Imperial Sword though, this was the sword that Susanoo supposedly obtained from the tale of Orochi in the original myth. It was later named Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which is also the name of one of the lesser-powered swords in Okami. As for why the more powerful sword has lightning-based powers, I like to think that this reflects the highest virtue of Buddhism, which is to cultivate a mind that is akin to lightning. By doing this, one can cut through the veil of reality as a lightning bolt cuts across the sky, and thereby attain enlightenment. I say this for 2 reasons. One is that there is another game that links the unification of the elements to achieving a lightning state of mind, and that is Devil May Cry 3. At one point in the game, you go through 4 doors symbolic of the 4 elements to obtain the item known as the Vajra, whose name means lightning, and is used as a tool in meditation. If you want to see all the evidence for that, I will link to my video on Devil May Cry in the description box below. The second reason I link the Thunder Edge to Buddhist ethics goes back to Orochi. I found the addition of lightning and poison to the otherwise standard system to be interesting. Having light and dark there makes sense. It is from the intermingling of these opposite forces, of yin and yang, that the four classical elements spring forward. For lightning and poison to make sense, I think lightning represents the perfect union of the four classical elements, while poison represents the perfect disunity. It represents Orochi. There is one more example of the elements unifying to produce divinity, or some sort of ultimate power, and it is with this example that I can potentially tie Okami and Zelda together beyond their similar game design. That example lies in The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I did a video on that game a couple of years ago where I demonstrate how two concepts from that game could be linked to Buddhist metaphysics. One is with the four giants representing the four elements, and the other is the linking of the fierce deity mask in that game to the most powerful Buddha in the Buddhist hierarchy. In that video, I cited research done by a fellow YouTuber named Zeltic, who demonstrated that the Japanese text for fierce deity links to the Buddha known as Vairocana, but we will be referring to him by his Japanese name, Dainichi. To be more specific, the Japanese text links the fierce deity to the wrathful or fierce form of Dainichi, who is known as Fudo Myoo. The logic here is that because Link unites the powers of the four elements, represented by the four giants in that game, to save the land of Termina, he can embody the fifth element, which signifies ultimate reality and enlightenment. In Buddhism, that fifth element is Dainichi, and the way to embody Dainichi is to embody the virtues of the four Buddha that surround him, which include, but are not limited to, the four elements. Bringing things back to Okami, I invoke the concept of Dainichi because of his relation to the goddess Amaterasu. As I said before, Japanese culture famously syncretizes a variety of other religions, including Buddhism. In fact, for much of Japanese history, there was an active attempt to portray Shinto and Buddhist gods as the same. Here are a few quotes from a scholar of Japanese mythology, Joshua Friedman. Starting in the 9th century, religious leaders went a step further and proposed that native kami and Buddhist gods were not only similar beings, but the same. This concept is known as Honji Suijaku, or original ground and left behind tracings. The concept was originally introduced in China during the Tang Dynasty as a way to incorporate Taoist and local folk deities into Buddhism. Japanese monks who studied in China then brought the idea of Honji Suijaku back to Japan. By the early Kamakura period, Honji Suijaku had become standard theory for several Buddhist schools, and it remained the most popular explanation for the relationship between the two religions for centuries. By the late Kamakura period, a group of priests based in Ise, Japan, known as the Watarai family, put forward a famous form of syncretism. Quote, "They borrowed the doctrine of Vairocana's radiance, Dainichi's radiance, producing Buddhas across the cosmos, and applied it to Amaterasu. Since the solar deity was herself the reflection of purity and light, it stood to reason that she could be representative of the purity at the center of the multiverse, in the same way that various Buddhas were supposed to be emanations of Vairocana, Dainichi. Amaterasu was therefore an emanation of Dainichi as well, but one who was uniquely oriented towards Japan and the Japanese."
Shall I show you their Dainichi? Behold, there is the Son of God.
To put it simply, just as Link was a reflection of Dainichi, so too was the goddess Amaterasu in both the Shinto religion and in Okami. Given all the similarities between Okami and Zelda, Hideki Kamiya's professed admiration of the Zelda series, and the popular linking of Dainichi and Amaterasu, I wonder if his choice to make a game with Amaterasu as the protagonist, starting off as a mortal being stripped of her powers and slowly regaining her divinity, was a subtle tribute to Link in Majora's Mask. Even if this wasn't intentional, and that very well might be the case, it still resonates wonderfully on a symbolic level. And that is why I think it's fair to say that Okami is the greatest Zelda game that is not called Zelda. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it motivated you to check out Okami if you haven't played it yet, and if you have played it, I hope this video hyped you up even more for the sequel. Special thanks to my longtime friend and Discord moderator, Marcus, for encouraging me to play the game and for reviewing my script. Finally, if you like this video, I am confident that you will like any of the videos you see on screen now. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.